Hi everyone, welcome. We're so happy to see you here. Thank you so much for making the effort to be here today, especially for such an important conversation. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Melissa Ford. I'm the director of the Western Hemisphere initiative here at the America First Policy Institute. I recognize a lot of friendly faces. I know probably some of you have been to our events before, either our official launch back at the beginning of the summer or our Mexico Policy Summit back in September, so you may have heard me talk about the initiative before, but I want to say a few quick words about the Western Hemisphere initiative, why we have it and why it's important. So we've been working towards a Western Hemisphere initiative since earlier this year, and the reason that we have it is because we believe that protecting the homeland begins with safeguarding the Western Hemisphere. So that's the importance behind it. And I know that we are going to delve into what that looks like specifically for Venezuela. Our CEO and President Greg will talk about it. But I would like to introduce him. First of all, he is a person without whose leadership none of this work would be possible at the America First Policy Institute or in the Western Hemisphere Initiative. And he has done an amazing job leading not only the America First Policy Institute, but also the Texas Public Policy Institute in Austin, Texas as well. So thank you, Greg. We will hear from Greg, and then actually let me fill you guys in on kind of the run of show that we can expect. Oh, thank you. Hello. Oh, I'm sorry. I was like, I think it's on. Okay, sorry for busting your eardrums. But before I introduce Greg, I want to fill you guys in on what the agenda will look like today. Greg will give some opening remarks, then we will hear a video message from President-Elect Edmundo González. After that, we have a very distinguished panel for you guys, and we will have a conversation after that with all of you with an opportunity to ask questions. And then we will hear from María Corina on live video, after which we will get some closing remarks from our very own Chad Wolf. So without further ado, Greg Sindelar, please help me and welcome him into the stage.
Thank you, Melissa. Well, I appreciate y'all being here today. I don't know if my leadership has much to do with this other than I know that we hire really good people and I trust them on these issues, and Melissa has been a stalwart. She's worked with me at TPPF and at America First Policy, and I've trusted her many times down in Mexico with very interesting speeches, which I wasn't so certain that I could say some of the words that I said, but I'm here, so they must have been okay. But I want to talk a little bit about what's happening in Venezuela today, and I really appreciate y'all being here because I think this is a really important conversation. But there's a reason that we are hosting a roundtable about what is happening in Venezuela at America First Policy Institute. After all, though, but you might be thinking, well, what does this have to do, and what does the liberation and governance of Venezuela have to do with being America First? And the answer to that question lies in the heart, actually, of why we're here and why we're putting this on. And it's also at the heart of why a growing number of American airmen and sailors and Marines are moving into harm's way in the Southern Caribbean as we speak. When we look at Venezuela, which I would say is a narco state ruled by a corrupt dictator, we are looking at a wave of the future if the other side has its way and America does nothing. The reality is that the past generation of American policymaking when it comes to national security and power projection took its eye off the ball in about 100 different ways. You don't need me to go through every example, but when we get to the point that American armed forces were actively guarding an oil field in southern Syria, but not an American town in southern Texas, we know that something has gone terribly wrong. And one of the many reasons the American people called President Donald J. Trump back into public service a year ago, in fact, just a year ago, a few days ago, was to fix that. And fix that he has done. Almost unnoticed in the literally hundreds of executive orders he signed in the first few days in office was one that was as easily consequential as the rest. A presidential order for the Department of Defense, now obviously the Department of War, to actually prioritize the defense of America and Americans. It's so simple and so obvious and so necessary that only the permanent Washington, D.C. ruling class would ever have made it necessary. What we see today in the Southern Caribbean, where American forces are sinking narco-trafficking vessels on the high seas and thereby directly defending the American communities and the American people who are killed by their wares, is a direct result of that clarity, of that vision. You've seen some in the media and in DC itself question whether this is proper use of military force. They will argue that this is properly a job for law enforcement. Well, we know the answer. The president is right, and the armed forces of the United States are righteous. And key to the prudence, legality, and necessity of America's military campaign in the Southern Caribbean and Eastern Pacific is the fact that international drug trafficking has transformed into something other than what it used to be. There was a day when these were generally just purely criminal enterprises, massive to be sure, but mostly without a political program and mostly without political support. But we know that those days are now over. From Mexico to Cuba to Venezuela and beyond, the traffickers who murder Americans by the thousands today are almost always allies of the state in some fashion, either having captured the state or having partnered with it, or even being sponsored by it. And this is absolutely the case in Venezuela, where the Cartel de los Solos and Tren de Agua are both credibly known to be partners of the Maduro regime, and even, in the case of the former, helmed by regime personnel. State threats require state responses, and that's exactly what America, thanks to the leadership of President Trump, is doing now. And that's why this is America first. The action, such as it is on the high seas and the South American coast. But what's being defended are American lives, American children, American communities in the Ohio River Valley, in the Great West, in the rural Southwest, and everywhere else. And no cause is really more righteous. So today we have a gathering of thinkers and activists and courageous freedom fighters to discuss what comes next, what comes after Venezuela is free. We're not here to predict how that will happen or when, but we do know, because we're not in the preceding generation of American policymakers who have neglected what happens the day after, that the time to think about all this is now, and today we will discuss it in full. We will also hear from one of the most courageous women in public life, someone I've been honored to get to know, Nobel Peace Prize recipient María Corina Machado, a woman who I admire greatly and is doing truly the Lord's work in Venezuela. So thank you all for coming today. Thank you for being part of this important conversation, and thank you for leading America and America in the Western Hemisphere. So with that, I'll turn it back over to my wonderful colleague, Melissa. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Thank you so much, Greg. What a very important reminder of why the governance and liberation of Venezuela matter to the America First movement. So I know that we will dive further into that during our panel, and I don't want to delay us any further, but before we get started with our amazing people here on the panel, I want to introduce that we are going to have a video right behind me from President-Elect Edmundo González. And let me introduce him. In April 2024, he was chosen as the unity candidate of Venezuela's democratic opposition. And on July 28th of that same year, he was elected president with over 70% of the vote, in a process that has been very supported by many citizens of Venezuela as well as international observers. From his exile now in Spain, he continues to lead efforts to advance a democratic, peaceful, and constitutional transition in Venezuela. So we will play his brief message before we jump into the roundtable.
Dear representatives, organizers, and attendees of this roundtable, dear friends at the America First Policy Institute, representatives of the United States and other partner nations, and all honored guests joining us for this roundtable today. I want to say first that the world is currently facing significant changes, and I am pleased that the Trump administration and we in our team share a similar vision. Although our shared continent, the Americas, is vast and diverse, it is united by common values and shared geopolitical interests. Latin America is part of the Western world, and as such, belongs to the same community of values. These values include freedom, family, hard work, honesty, and loving our countries. However, everything we know and value is under structural threat that must be neutralized. On the one hand, narco-terrorism is poisoning our societies and corrupting our governments. On the other hand, the growing interference of power from outside the hemisphere, such as Russia, China, and Iran, endangers the security and integrity of our continent. The people of Venezuela are more aware of this threat than any other people in the Americas. That is why we Venezuelans fought so hard to make our voices heard at the ballot box, challenging the narco-terrorist Maduro's regime in an election where we defeated him with almost 70% of the vote. This is why the Venezuelan people provide the perfect foundation on which to build a new national project for our country, based on freedom, order, and prosperity. This project will see our country's immense wealth put at the service of the Venezuelans and the free world, rather than criminals and enemies of the West. Our struggle has been long and hard. We have been preparing for this moment for years. Venezuela has many world-class professionals who have spent years drawing up the project for change, and we must now have it ready. Change long awaited by our people, who are not divided by ethnicity, culture, or religion. Venezuela is a Western, mainly Catholic country with a long tradition of friendship with the United States and deep desire to return to the path of order, development, freedom, and democracy. As soon as the transition begins, it is these shared values and aspirations that will provide the firmest guarantee that the new national project will move forward successfully. With the support of our Western allies, Venezuela will play a key role in ensuring regional and energy security in the Americas. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. What a great introduction. As the president-elect put so well, they have been working towards and preparing for so many years to be able to take back their country and rebuild it. And so we are honored actually to have a few of them right here who we can't wait to hear from. But to start off the roundtable, I want to start with a big picture question. And Chad, I'm going to start with you. One of the people that we are joined by today is Chad Wolf, our Executive Vice President, Chief Strategy Officer, and Chair of our Center for Homeland Security and Immigration here at the America First Policy Institute. And he has also served as the Acting Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. So he's been at the forefront of shaping America's homeland and immigration policies. So Chad, can you tell us, why does what happens in Venezuela matter not only to U.S. national security and to our broader strategy in the Western Hemisphere, but why should it matter to average Americans?
Well, it's good to be here. I think I'll say some obvious things on why it matters to the U.S. and happy to expand on that. Obviously, it's in our hemisphere, and I think for far too long, administration after administration has ignored what happens in our hemisphere to the detriment of everyday Americans. Instead, we focused on things that are in Europe or Asia or Middle East or elsewhere and ignored the threats, the security concerns here in the hemisphere. And how that relates, obviously, to Venezuela, I'll say the obvious thing, right? Obviously, it's a narco state. I think Greg mentioned that. And so when you have a narco state like that combined with other narco-terrorists in the hemisphere, it's killing Americans. It's killing Americans every day with illegal narcotics being smuggled into the United States from Mexico, from Central America, South America, and the like. So, and I think far too long, I think the Trump administration shares this view, obviously. I think for far too long, we've looked at this as a law enforcement issue. We will, we'll try to take down the head of a cartel. We'll extradite them to the U.S. We may, put them on trial. We'll convict them. We may do a couple of other things. And as I like to say, you're making slow increments around the edges of the issue, but you're not really tackling the issue itself. And we've done that in the past. We've done that from time to time, whether it was Panama or elsewhere. And I think it's important. I think the Trump administration is through a variety of things, right? And we can go all the way back to the beginning of the administration, from the FTO designation to a number of other steps that they've taken. They've taken a deliberate strategy that says we're not going to continue to do business as usual. We're going to attack this threat in a very different way. And I think that's what you see today. And so it's, Venezuela is destabilizing the hemisphere, the region, from a trade perspective, from a variety of perspectives. And it's not just Maduro. Maduro is bad enough, but it's also an entry point for Iran, obviously Cuba as well, the Chinese and elsewhere. Individuals and adversaries to the U.S. have a foothold here in the hemisphere because of a regime that we currently have in Venezuela. So the security implications are massive for the United States on a day-to-day basis, but also on a more strategic basis. So I think it's really important what the Trump administration's doing. Obviously, they would like to do this peacefully. I think the president's talked about that time and time again. But as we like to say, peace through strength, there comes a time to use strength to achieve that peace and to be that peacemaker that we know the president is. So I think what's occurring down there in the region is complicated, but you've got a big team inside the Trump administration working on it. And I think they've got the right approach as it moves forward.
We also have the honor of being joined by three amazing and very seasoned policy advisors for President-Elect Edmundo González and María Corina Machado. We are joined by Gustavo Garcia, an energy advisor, Rafael de la Cruz, who's director of the DC office, and also economic and institutional advisor. And we have David Smolansky, who focuses mostly on security, but he has also been a mayor in Venezuela, in a municipality close to Caracas, if I'm not mistaken. And he has also served as the special envoy for the Venezuelan refugee and migration crisis. So thank you guys so much for being here. David, I'm going to start with you. I know that when a lot of us think about Venezuela, we associate it with how it is such a tragedy in so many ways. But the reason that we're here today is talk about opportunity. What makes you so confident that that is coming?
First of all, thank you so much, America First Policy Institute, for organizing this very important event for Venezuela, for our democratic and freedom cause. And thank you all for coming. Well, we've been in this strategy for 27 years, and it is about to end. We are very optimistic that the transition will start soon. And this is an epic fight against narco-terrorist regime that have started a new chapter, I would say, in 2023. 2023, it was the moment that we legitimized the democratic leader of the opposition, in this case, María Corina Machado, that almost 2 million people went to vote on that primary, and she got elected with 93% of the vote. So that moment, we have a legitimate leadership to lead this new chapter on our fight. Then in 2024, even though she was illegally banned for running, we have 120 members of our campaign who were illegally detained. 5 of them were hostages on the Argentine embassy in Caracas. People outside Venezuela were not able to vote. We were able to have an election with Edmundo González, and we defeated the regime 70-30, with 85% of the voting tallies that were gathered by more than 600,000 Venezuelans that were organized for that day. Probably the biggest civil organization that we have ever had, not only in Venezuela, but probably in Latin America, to the point that those voting tallies today are preserved in Panama. And that's the proof that we won. So we defeated the regime. The Venezuelan people already decided a regime change, and it was 70-30. If we'd have had a free and fair elections, we would have won 90-10. And now we are in 2025, where finally the elephant in the room has been addressed. Yes, we have been under a narco-terrorist regime over 20 years, because all the scheme of drug trafficking, illegal mining, fuel smuggling, human trafficking, we've been suffering for that over 2 decades. Hugo Chavez created that. It was delegated to Diosdado Cabello to be the head of the of the drug trafficking scheme. Then they opened the doors to non-state armed groups from Colombia, such as ELN and FARC. Then non-state armed groups were created in Venezuela, such as colectivos, as we know in Spanish. And well, only last year, 8.4 billion with a B dollars got to Venezuela through drug trafficking for the regime, which is the same as oil. So when you see that, we have a legitimate leadership elected by the people, not once or twice. 9 out of 10 Venezuelans want the regime out. We have a huge support from neighboring countries in Latin America, from the US, from Canada, from the UK, from the vast majority of the members of the EU, from Israel, from even nations from Asia, such as Korea, Japan, Australia. And also, I would say, and we will speak that about later as well, but I think we are in a geopolitical position very favorable this moment that in other moments in the past, because Iran has been weakened. China has not given a single dollar to Maduro during the last 7 years officially. They are providing other tools. I will speak about that later. And Russia obviously has been on a fatigue after the invasion in Ukraine for more than 3 years. So I think there is a geopolitical opportunity right now, focus on the external actors that have always supported Maduro that we have not seen in the past. Having said that, obviously I do not underestimate the influence of those external actors in the regime. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. Rafael, I'm going to go to you next. Rafael, when that time comes for you all, when the opportunity for that full democratic transition opens for you, how ready are the President-Elect and María Corina's team to really govern? And what do you think would be the top 3 priorities in the first weeks of governance?
Thank you, Melissa, and thanks also to the American First Policy Institute for this opportunity. Actually, we concur completely that the security of the United States depends also on the security of the whole hemisphere. And in that context, Venezuela is clearly a very hot spot that needs to be resolved. And we want, first of all, ensure that you understand that the Venezuelan people is determined to do this. And we are extremely grateful to the American people and to the Trump administration for what they are doing in that sense. Many priorities, of course, but if I have to choose 3, first and foremost, security, and I'm going to develop a little bit that. Second, economy. Third, tackling the humanitarian crisis in Venezuela. Security has at least 2 main points that we need to tackle: control of the territory and control of the institutions. There's a lot of speculation about that. Well, the military are with Maduro or are not with Maduro, et cetera, et cetera. They are not. Let me tell you this. We got, as already David said, the tally sheet of the election. And we were particularly interested in looking at where the military voted, because there are, polling stations that are near the military facilities and inside the military facilities, actually. And I particularly went, in my case, I went to see the place where the Minister of Defense, Padrino Lopez, the general, voted. Exactly the same as the rest of the country. Exactly the same. I mean, they are not Martians, they're Venezuelans. They got mothers and sisters and sons and uncles, etc., that are fed up with Maduro and with the regime and with socialism. So the military is part of Venezuela, and we are going to count on many of the military, not with all, not all. Some of them are criminals, and we are going to put them in prison and go to take them to the justice that they deserve. But the military are going to obey, and we are going to work with the military. We are going to rebuild the military. This is extremely important, and for that, I hope that we are going to have also the help of the United States. We need to completely revamp the military in Venezuela. And then the institutions. Again, we got a lot of civil servants that are civil servants, that are not Chavistas, or probably they at a given point, we're under the influence because of, at the end of the day, they call the shots, let's say. But at the end of the day, these are civil servants, and we are going to work with them. And we have sent them message after message saying, don't worry, don't be scared, stay in your position, we are going to get there, and we are going to work with you. And we are going to transform the state, of course. We are going to transform the government very deeply, and this is going to be a very progressive and thoughtful process. But we are going to count on these people that, particularly with the amount of people that are working for the state, socialism is known for that. They like that, to have a lot of people in the state, in the government. We are going to transfer them progressively to the private sector as much as the economy evolves. So this is one thing that is very important. In terms of economic, our plan is made in a way that we are going to stabilize the economy, and we are going also to restart the process of economic growth in Venezuela. For that, there is one particular point that we need to tackle, and that we are already doing that. And Gustavo here, which is our coordinator of the economic team, has been working on that with me and other colleagues. We are having already informal negotiations or conversations with the multilaterals, with the International Monetary Fund, with the World Bank, and with the Inter-American Development Bank. And we are expecting very soon to start formal negotiations with them for having a reconstruction program, a rebuilding program of the country. So that's something that is happening and informally, but clearly this is one of the first priorities that we need to have in terms of restarting the economy. And finally, well, I'm sure that most of you know how dire is the situation of the population in Venezuela. Yesterday Gustavo and I, we had a meeting with a guy that was one of the main managers of the oil company in Venezuela in the times of before Chavismo. And he is a pensioner. I mean, he's a retiree. And he got 53 cents to this month. What was that? 53, I think. 53 cents today, I mean, this month, as a pension. I'm not going to go through the whole dramatic situation, humanitarian situation, but clearly we need to tackle that. And in order to do that, of course, the medium long-term solution is a growing economy, a robust labor market, people well paid and productive, et cetera, et cetera. But in the very short term, with this incredible situation, we need to start a process of a program of direct transfers to the population. And for that, we are also in communication with the administration here, trying to identify assets that Venezuela has here and in other countries that we can use for that. And also part of our rebuilding plan with the multilaterals will include a very first and temporary segment of the program that would be financing also these direct transfers. So these are a few of the things. Of course, there are many other things. The country is, we got a lot of things to do, and we need to be coordinated. And we have a fantastic team of people, more than 20 different groups working in different policies, and looking at the institutions that are in charge of this policy, et cetera, et cetera. So we are ready. The message that we would like to convey to you guys is we are ready. We are going to take control of the territory. We are going to take control of the institutions, and we are going to restart the economy and get Venezuela, is going to be the biggest opportunity in the continent probably in the next few years.
Thank you so much, Rafael. And Ambassador Reich, I want to give you the opportunity to jump in here. We're so excited, first of all, to have you here with us today. Thank you for making the trip to be here. Sir, you've had a very impressive career, and you've worn many hats throughout that career, some of those including you were the U.S. Ambassador to Venezuela, you served as Assistant Secretary of State for Western Hemisphere Affairs, you've also been a Special Envoy for Latin America, and not only that, but you've dedicated decades of service to promoting democracy and liberty in the Western Hemisphere, and you've gotten the very unique opportunity to witness the US-Venezuela relationship over a long period of time. So I want to ask you, how do you think that the United States and our other friends and allies in the America should approach the potential democratic transition differently this time?
Well, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm very glad that AFPI is doing this because I have been involved in Latin American affairs my entire life. Since I was born in Cuba, I saw the first country in the hemisphere go communist against the wishes of the people, obviously. There's no country in the world that has freely elected a communist government. And in Cuba, I lived under the previous regime, Batista, for a few years. I'm 120 years old. I don't show a day over 119. But seriously, I was a kid. But you don't forget certain things. And what happened in Cuba is the lesson that Fidel Castro, who was unfortunately an evil genius. I mean, history is full of evil geniuses that have undermined peace and prosperity and democracy all over the world and taken the United States to war many times. In the case of Venezuela, Fidel Castro, the first visit he ever made to a country after taking over from Batista, 4 weeks after taking over, he went to Venezuela. That's how long. This was January 28, 1959. The first anniversary of the overthrow of Pérez Jiménez, General Pérez Jiménez, who had been the military ruler of Venezuela for several years. And Castro demonstrated the importance of Venezuela to Cuba. Cuba hasn't given up on trying to control Venezuela. And in fact, in the last few years, they have succeeded. Under Fidel first, working with Hugo Chavez, and then Raúl working with Maduro. To the point where in 1959, in that visit, Castro asked the democratically elected president of Venezuela, Rómulo Betancourt, he said, I need you to give me $300 million. Venezuela was a wealthy country because it produced a lot of oil. And Castro said, and President Betancourt says, why do you need $300 million? Cuba is a rich country. And in fact, if you look at the socioeconomic data, Cuba was a very advanced country. Walt Rostow, in his book, The Stages of Development, put Cuba in the takeoff stage in the 1950s, which is the number 3 out of 5 stages of economic development. And Betancourt says, Cuba's a rich country. He says, I have a lot of problems in Venezuela. We have poor people in Venezuela. I can't give you $300 million. Castro didn't forgive him. And 3 years later, he sponsored an expedition of Cuban commandos into Venezuela to try to take over militarily in 1962. It failed. But I mention this because if we look at the hemisphere, we see the footprint of the Cuban snake, frankly. The head of the snake is in Havana. And in the case of Venezuela, the Cubans have practically run the repressive mechanism in Venezuela. I know because I've seen them. I've been in meetings with the President of the United States where we've seen Chavez, back in Chavez's years, Cuban bodyguards guarding the President of Venezuela because they didn't trust Venezuelan bodyguards. And the Cubans are still guarding Maduro. And the Cubans are running the torture chambers in Venezuela because they have a lot of experience from Cuba. So my point is, we have to look at the causes of why is Maduro staying on in power in a country where people are leaving. A fifth of the population, if I'm not mistaken, has left Venezuela. The ones that are staying don't have enough to eat. And yet there's a new class of oligarchs that have plenty. They have luxury cars, and they have supermarkets with imported caviar and other things for those who are associated with the regime, similar to Cuba. Cuba is also bankrupt, and yet the military industrial complex, there's a company that was set up by Raul Castro's son-in-law, who passed away, called Gaesa, which it has been shown by US press recently is worth about $18 billion. And yet the Cubans don't have enough money to import oil to run automobiles in Cuba. This is what happens when communism takes over. We, the United States, need to recognize that we cannot project our power. We cannot defend our interests around the world if our hemisphere is not stable and democratic and doesn't export people. Now, fortunately, the Trump administration has stopped the madness of the previous administration of allowing, millions of people to come over. But a lot of this, believe it or not, was actually also created by the governments of Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. They had an air bridge where they transported people to Managua from Caracas, from Havana, and then they, depending on how much they were willing to pay, they could either get on a bus or they could just walk to the US border. Anyway, I could go on. What I'm saying is there's plenty of people here who know more about the future of Venezuela than I do. I hope to see a free Venezuela soon. I spent 3 years as ambassador. It was a growing country. It had a tremendous future, and it was ruined by the naivete on the part of some politicians. I had personal arguments with some of the people, including the president, who I got along with, but we disagreed. President Carlos Andres Perez, who thought he was a friend of Fidel Castro. He told me, he's my friend. He's not going to do anything against me. Well, Carlos Andres Perez died in exile in Miami, blaming Fidel Castro for what had happened in Venezuela. So let's not make the same mistakes. As we look to a reconstructed Venezuela, we need to look at the cause of the problems in the hemisphere. It's not just Venezuela, Colombia, Nicaragua, until recently Bolivia. Fortunately, Bolivia has had an election and a democratic president has been elected. But there's many other countries that we have problems with, and many of those problems emanate from Havana. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. That was very well said. David, I want to give you the opportunity to jump in just quickly. As the ambassador shared, the current regime has turned Venezuela into a hub for terrorism, instability, organized crime, and other hostile and anti-American actors. So can you share quickly what a real restoration of order looks like and what a government would need to do in order for that to happen?
Sure. So first of all, why Venezuela has become the hub of criminality in the Americas is a synergy of different aspects. One of it, and not many people know about this, is that since this regime came to power, almost 500,000 people have been killed because of crime. So Venezuela has been a safe haven for gangs, mega gangs, non-state armed groups, as I said at my first earlier. And well, mega gangs such as TDA that started in Venezuela, right now has come even to the US, and it's been in at least 8 countries in the America. And we learned today that also they have landed in Spain as well. That's one thing. Second, the synergy of external actors. I explained that I'm optimistic geopolitically speaking about China, Russia, and Iran, but obviously they have been in the nation, in my country, for over 20 years with different support. In the case of China, they have given more than $60 billion, but they have not given any more during the last 7 years. In the case of Russia, the main arms provider. In the case of Iran, the second arms provider. More specifically, they have been providing recently drones, and as the ambassador described very well, Cuba. The regime, the Cubans have been in Venezuela since day one. Cubans have, I mean, when people talk about invasion, Venezuela has been invaded by Cuba since 1999. It is difficult to estimate how many Cubans have been in Venezuela, but there are some scholars that have said that almost 20,000 Venezuelans, 20,000 Cubans covered of professors, teachers, nurses, doctors have gone to Venezuela to do inter and counter agencies. And there are reports from the UN, from the Organization of American States, that victims that have been free from jail, they have said that they have seen or heard Cubans advising and participating in repression and tortures. The last one was the UN fact-finding mission report on this. So on this context, we have to do some immediate actions. One is definitely we have identified critical infrastructure that we will take control, that go from security infrastructure, energy infrastructure, telecommunications infrastructure. Second, those hostile actors will be immediately expelled from Venezuela, more specifically Cuba and Iran. Third, there has going to be a surgical purge of the cartel. Not many people know this, but Venezuela has 2,000 generals. That's more than the whole NATO. So that's the cartel. When I hear people here in DC saying, "Oh, why don't you do a power sharing?" What is the power sharing? The power sharing is already being made, right? The generals take care of the gold mines, the gas fields, the oil refineries. They are mayors, they are governors, they sell chicken, they are ministers, they sell drugs, they are in the clandestine. So, but the low rank and middle rank officials, as my colleague Rafael said, they want a different Venezuela. And they want to obey the President-Elect and María Corina Machado. And if you see every poll center where soldiers vote, the result was exactly the same as the rest of the nation, 70-30. So here are the thing is the 2,000 generals here. The 2,000 generals. These are the main pillar for the regime with some of the external actors and obviously some of the non-state armed groups I already mentioned. So if we do that surgical purge of the cartel on the general level, that will make a big difference. And then we are already thinking on creating different units on this. A unit on counterterrorism, a unit on counter-narcotics, and also a unit of asset recovery. Venezuela could have a rapid rebuilding because there are billions of dollars because of corruption and money laundering that have ended on different parts of the world, especially in Europe, especially in Madrid, Spain. So if we are able to recover those assets quickly, we will have enough money or a lot of money to implement the different policies, not only on security, but as my colleague said, on the tackle the humanitarian crisis, healthcare, education, among others. And one last thing, I'm very optimistic, and not many people in Venezuela speak about this, the police forces. Sometimes the focus is on the armed forces. And as a former mayor, I can say this, the police forces in Venezuela have been humiliated for years because we have local police, state police, and national police. And when you see local and regional police, and even national police as well, the directors on most of those police forces are military, are generals and colonels, and they are humiliated because there are some police that have done a good job for 5, 10, 15 years, and they have they cannot go to the upper level on that. So there is an opportunity to reinstitutionalize our police, to give them more opportunity, to improve them with equipment, with technology, to improve their salaries, and also that to demilitarize the police. If we demilitarize the police, the impact on citizen security, we will see it very quickly. I had that experience. We were able to decrease crime more than 80%, more specifically kidnapping. And one of the problems that we had was that the police was militarized. And that's not a role for the armed forces. So I'm optimistic also on the police. And again, the vast majority, we know that they voted for Edmundo González and María Corina Machado last year.
Thank you, David. Gustavo, despite the conditions described in a completely devastated economy, Venezuela remains very rich in natural resources. Beyond just oil, there are minerals, gold, and other energy potential. So what do these resource opportunities look like, not just for the US, but for the entire region's resource security?
Well, good morning. Thank you, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to share with you several elements of the economic program of María Corina Machado. I'm the coordinator of the economic team, and particularly I'm working very hard on the energy sector, because in Venezuela, if you don't understand the energy, particularly the oil sector, so half or more of the economy is going to be out of the picture. We plan to do three key things at the very beginning. The first is to implement a social transfer program, because we are in a humanitarian emergency, which is very critical. The situation is now deteriorating even further in recent months. Inflation is running about 20-something% in the last 3 months. October was 27. That means if you annualize that figure, we are going through a 4-digit inflation rate in the next few months. So we are very close to get again to hyperinflation in a country that has been impoverished quite dramatically. We are registering even inflation in dollar terms, about 20% annually in dollars. So the situation is quite dramatic, and the economy is in a recession. And most of the company report that the reason of the recession is because people are not demanding, because they don't have money to demand, because of what Rafael mentioned, the whole collapse of the system. So as a key element that we are going to finance the multilateral institutions is to address that emergency with a social transfer at the very beginning until we can overcome that situation. The second part of the program is an investment program, particularly in social infrastructure that has been collapsed. The public health system is in shambles because of the infrastructure in hospital and so on, but similarly in the educational infrastructure. Just let me tell you something. Kids are going to school in Venezuela only twice during a week. 2 days in a week are going to the school. The rest of the week, they're doing whatever. So this is very dramatic situation. So we need to address that, to give the kids food in the schools, meals and so on, so that they have the incentive to go to the school and to have the teacher to go there, because they are abandoning the educational system because of the low salary. So we need to address that. And that will have an impact somehow in economic growth, because people are going to have money to demand goods and services. The professors are going to go back to work to the schools and so on. And we are going to invest in recovering the infrastructure in order to get the economy moving in the very soon. But we are going to do, this is what we call an expansive stabilization program. There is no room at all for any austerity program in Venezuela, but inflation has to be cut. And the way we are going to cut that is closing immediately the monetary financing of the deficit by the central bank. The central bank is issuing money not only to finance the government, but also the oil company because they are bankrupt. So we are going to do that with the financing of the multilateral institutions and the recovery of financial assets that are abroad in several countries that we are identifying and so on. But this is the kind of conversation that we are having with the multilateral institution and the US government and so on. But immediately, we also plan to reform very deeply the oil policy in Venezuela. We're going to open the oil sector totally to the private sector. No need to be associated with PDVSA. PDVSA is going to be subject to a divestment program, and we are going to sell all the assets that are available so that they could be acquired by the private sector. We are going to make the fiscal system very competitive. Venezuela has a very, one of the highest government take in the oil sector. Is that high that is the second highest fiscal pressure on the private sector. That's why the private sector in the oil sector abandoned Venezuela. Some people ask me, well, why Chevron is producing? Have they sent it to go and they want to go there and so on? Of course, they are in the top of a mountain of assets that were invested in the past. So they want to recover that investment. But they are not willing to do a huge new investment that we need in order to recover the oil sector. So we're going to open the oil sector to the private sector. 100% stocks can be acquired by the private sector and start producing oil in Venezuela with a much lower fiscal pressure. We're going to reduce the income tax for the oil company from 50 to 34%, which is the same rate for all the rest of the economic activity, and we're going to reduce royalty dramatically in order to reflect the condition of the oil sector in Venezuela. So we are going to have a scale using a technical factor in order to see what is the royalty rate that can be paid by the private sector according to the profitability of the oil fields and so on. This is amazing. Venezuela has the largest oil reserve in the Western Hemisphere and one of the largest, if not the largest, in the world. It has a production cost which is pretty low because the infrastructure is down there. It requires investment to be done in order to get production in full capacity. But I mean, you don't have to pay or to request from 15 municipalities authorization to go with an oleoduct or something like that. That is there. So if the investment period is going to be very short, it's going to be important, but it's going to be very profitable. Let me tell you something. We have done a lot of estimation. The break-even point to produce oil in Venezuela, including royalty and including also the other fiscal contribution, which is the income tax, plus whatever you need in order, for example, to move heavy oil with diluents or with the oil improvers, the break-even cost, including all those factors, in Venezuela is between $26 and $27 per barrel. The only countries in the world that are capable of producing oil below that level are the Arabic countries, okay? Because they have light oil, of course, much better than ours, and they have the capacity, the whole infrastructure down there. Those are the only countries that are able to produce oil at a lower cost in Venezuela. Even gas for us, gas is even cheaper, and we have a huge capacity in gas reserve. Venezuela has the 7th largest gas reserve in the world, and many of those fields are not being exploited because of the whole thing that happened with PDVSA. So we are opening the oil sector to the private sector, and we estimate, according to the numbers that we have done, that we can increase oil production between 10 and 15 years to 4 or 6 million barrels per day. The only country, there are only 6 countries that produce more than 4 million barrels per day. The 3 oil giants, which is the US, Saudi Arabia, and Russia. And then you have 3 other countries that produce a little bit above 4 million barrels per day. Canada, which is getting close to 6 million barrels per day because it has taken the space that we abandoned, and 2 Arabic countries that produce more than 4 million barrels per day. So Venezuela is going to go back in the oil business with a very open sector, a very competitive sector, and we hope to recover what we had in the 60s in Venezuela. That was the second oil producer country in the world. And we are going to be very competitive for that and very aggressive on fiscal policy and guarantees to the private sector to go there in a very confident way to produce oil in Venezuela. We are going to implement the drill, baby, drill policy in the oil sector, okay? While at the same time, we are going to privatize all the state-owned companies in Venezuela, in the electricity, minerals, steel, water, whatever. It's going to be privatized. Why is that? Because the private sector can do that more efficiently. There is no question about that. There is no any reason for the electrical companies to be in hands of the government and so on. So we are going to privatize all state companies in Venezuela in all sectors. But the government is going to concentrate its economic activity basically in 2 things: to regulate the economy, because you need regulation for obvious reasons, and second, to recover the human capital in Venezuela, to put the state in the hands of the citizens for the citizens. And that will imply a huge social program in education, in health, security, and of course, a lot of training with new technology, our young and kids in Venezuela, in order to recover the years that were lost. So we are going to do a lot of boot camps in different areas that they can catch up the years that they have lost because of the collapse of the educational system. So that's our plan. As the ambassador mentioned, in the 50s, Cuba had the highest per capita income in the region. And it was displaced by Venezuela until the 80s. Venezuela was the highest per capita income in the region. So we are going to have a very open pro-private sector economy, but with a state focus on the Venezuelans to recover their health, the pension system that is totally broken, the educational system, security in general terms. And Venezuela has the capacity to provide security in energy for the whole hemisphere. And we plan to have Venezuela to be converted from the hub of terrorism and narco-trafficking and so on to be the hub of the energy for the Western Hemisphere. And that would be very important for the US and the all Latin American countries in the region, because even Brazil and Guyana are not able to compete with that in terms of profitability in the oil and gas sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Gustavo. Ryan, I want to invite you to respond to Gustavo's points that he made on energy potential. What would a more open and stable Venezuela mean for the US's geopolitical, energy, and security interests in the region? And why is that only possible with a democratic Venezuela?
Great, thanks very much, Melissa, and thanks to AFPI for this event. I think the president is right to pivot our focus back to the Americas. As Chad said in his opening remarks, I think there's no way for the United States to have power projection capabilities elsewhere in the world unless we are undisputed in terms of the regional power in the Western Hemisphere. And I think the administration is right to understand that decades of looking at other geographies of the world have basically accrued to China's gain in our own hemisphere. And so I welcome the pivot back to this really strong focus. I think taking a step back, Melissa, that your question is really an important one, because if you think about the 2 most problematic countries at the moment in South America, obviously Venezuela is number 1, but we don't particularly have a good relationship with Colombia either, right? And there are massive opportunities for change within the next year, right? on Venezuela, a democratic transition in Venezuela, making Venezuela become a key strategic partner in both in terms of economic and security, and then an election in Colombia, which should be a change election to get rid of Gustavo Petro, bring in once again a more traditional Western-aligned, Washington-aligned government in Colombia. I want to paint a picture of what that strategic context looks like, which could very well be the reality in less than a year. Colombia moving back into a more pro-America stance, and Venezuela with a pro-American democratic transition. You have Colombia as the security partner of old, and Venezuela an economic security and strategic partner in things like oil, gas, and critical minerals. It's a geopolitical reality that is absolutely transformed for the United States in Latin America, and would fulfill, I think, many of the administration's ambitions to turn the Western Hemisphere into a real boon for U.S. Geopolitical gain and also for power projection capability in other theaters of the world. The reason why we can't expect Venezuela to recover its rightful role as an energy producer, as an oil and gas hub, as a critical minerals producer, is precisely because of the politics of the regime in Venezuela. As I think has been mentioned on this panel, 3.5 million barrels per day was the apex of Venezuela's production. Very importantly, it was in 1998, I believe, just before the election of Hugo Chavez, right? And since then, it has been a dramatic, precipitous decline in terms of its economic output and also its oil output. So clearly the policies are driving a lot of this decline. The criminality, which is now, which PDVSA is now marked by, essentially a slush fund for the ruling regime to launder money and also to spend money on programs of social and political control. So the policies, the criminality, the insecurity, the lack of investment in maintenance of the oil infrastructure in the country. At one point in time, Venezuela was selling the scrap metal at sites because these rigs had fallen into such disrepair. So you don't get to a point where Venezuela can reach its full potential until there's a regime that thinks differently, can actually provide economic security, contract rights, property rights, a proper investment climate, a complete overhaul of the hydrocarbons law in Venezuela, et cetera, et cetera. And we've heard a lot of details from folks on this panel about deep thought that they've put into in terms of changing that investment climate and getting Venezuela back to its potential in terms of an oil, gas, and even a minerals producer. But I just want to paint that strategic context for you. Think about it, the next calendar year or even shorter period of time, Colombia and Venezuela becoming key strategic allies in economic terms, in security terms, in resources terms for the United States. Fewer opportunities for China, fewer opportunities for Russia, fewer opportunities for Iran. It's a geopolitical context transformed, and I think it's well within reach given the administration's policies and the moment we find ourselves in right now.
Thank you, Ryan. Leila, I'm going to turn to you. I know you focus mostly on Mexico, but you've had an impressive background in policy advising for Latin America. So I want to ask you, based on your experience with Mexico and some of the challenges that we see there, like institutional fragility, some corruption issues, what should the Venezuelans be prioritizing in their democratic transitions, or what lessons can they take from that?
Thank you so much, Melissa, and thank you to AFPI for the invite. It's been great to work with you in the past weeks and months. I lead the Mexico program at the Inter-American Dialogue, so many of you may be asking, why am I here when we're talking about Venezuela? But as I hear all these fantastic remarks across the board, there's so many similarities, right, that you start picking up on Mexico's historical trajectory, but even so right now in present day. So for many of you, or for those that have been tracking Mexico, Mexico actually had a 71-year rule of a one single party dominant rule for 71 years, right? It was the famous PRI. It was an authoritarian rule. A very famous Peruvian author called it the perfect dictatorship. And in 1929, when the PRI started with its presidential elections, presidential candidates would win with about 90% of the vote, right? That didn't really change until about the 1980s, when The presidential election of 1988, all of a sudden, the electoral system crashed, and the PRI candidate who had not been at the forefront, not winning the election, came out winning when the system was back up and running. And so Mexicans have a long history of ballot stuffing, of being very familiar with their vote not counting with elections that are not free. And it really wasn't until 1994 that the first PRI presidential candidate lost, or won, with just 50% of the popular vote. By 1997, the PRI had lost its majority in Congress, and by 2000, Mexico finally transitioned into a more democratic system. Now, why is this important? Because I think there are a lot of lessons that can be taken from Mexico's, authoritarian rule to its more democratic system, but I think there's a lot of warning signs as well. That just because a transition to a democracy doesn't necessarily mean that some of the maladies, the concerns, some of the issues that plague authoritarian regimes cannot be carried over to democratic systems. Now, I think some of the fundamentals, right, of democratic transitions and alternations can be drawn from Mexico's experience from having a really solid electoral body, right? The National Electoral Institute, now previously called the LIFE, now it's the INE, has been one of the most renowned electoral bodies in the world, not just in Mexico. And that has really allowed for the peaceful transition of power between 6 presidents, right, from different political parties since the year 2000. There's also been a real investment in institution building that has been they've gradually been disintegrated and weakened in past years, but the reality is that Mexico had very strong institutions. It did build a civil society that was robust. There is, at the time, and still to a large degree, of free media, freedom of expression. And so I think that has paved the way to not have a perfect democracy, but at least have this transition into a more democratic system. Now, when I hear some of the issues that Venezuela is currently dealing with, Mexico's still dealing with a lot of the same issues that it dealt under the 71-year rule of the PRI. And so if you don't attack corruption, impunity, if you don't have rule of law, you end up with a democratic system, yes, but that still is very much dealing with some of the same issues that it was dealing for the most part of the 20th century, right? And so when I hear, for example, David, you were talking about, the police at the municipal, state, national level being run by generals. Mexico had with, its issues, but it had a police force that has, evolved in years past, but that was always civilian in nature. It wasn't until AMLO came into office that he eliminated the civilian force. He created a National Guard and promised Mexicans that it would be led by a civilian leader. And quickly we learned that no, it was actually going to be run by generals. And as of last year, the National Guard is now formally part of the Ministry of Defense. And so there are many analysts, right, that say that Mexico is on a track, if not already, towards militarization, right? Something that, in fact, we were, in Mexico trying to move away from. So something to keep in mind, right? This isn't just democracy brings more civilian-led police forces. It's not that you have a more democratic system or strong institutions just because you're more democratic and you have fair elections and you have a peaceful transfer of power. Under the AMLO administration, right, I'm going to focus just on recent history. There's been real attacks and threats towards the National Electoral Institute, trying to debilitate it, trying to pack its electoral counselors to favor the governing party of Morena. There's been an assault on civil society. He actually wanted to reverse, Gustavo, a energy reform that was approved in Mexico in 2013 to open the energy sector to private investment. We now have in Mexico an energy reform that favors state-owned enterprises with nationalization of key industries like energy, right? So 54% of all shares of energy in Mexico now fall to state-owned enterprises, and only 46% can be coming from private investment. And so I think that there's, real lessons from Mexico that, we can just draw on and think about for Venezuela's transition. Mexico already passed a judicial reform, right? Separation of powers is key. You need to have a judicial independent branch, but Mexico just passed a judicial reform that allows all of its judges, from the state level to the municipal to state, I think I repeated that. But up to Supreme Court justices are now elected by popular vote. If we look at the fact that corruption continues to be sort of the glue that keeps all the institutions together, and much of that corruption comes because cartels are very much involved at all levels of Mexican government because of the corruption that endures. More than 95% of an impunity rate in Mexico, despite it being a democracy. You start to realize how this can really debilitate a government. And so I have so many other comments that I've written down, but I think that it is very important to say that reform has to be constant, and that in order for a democracy to endure, there have to be real Democrats in the sense that they believe in pursuing and maintaining, strengthening a democracy going forward. Reform is not always good. It actually can be bad in many instances. I would talk to some Mexican senators from the governing parties, and they said, well, you know, Mexico never really had a good justice system, right? So you couldn't get worse, and this is a judicial reform. Well, in fact, it can get worse, right? And we are seeing it because now organized crime has the ability to directly be involved in the election and selection of judges across the board in Mexico. And just to tie it back, I think for Chad, what you said about peace through strength and how now the Trump administration is using trade to deal with other issues, it's so true with the US-Mexico agenda, right? And I think it has to be, because while Mexico is very different to Venezuela in the sense that it's the US's top trading partner, it is the 12th economy in the world. There are such integrated supply chains with the US. There's a USMCA, a free trade agreement that brings all three countries of North America together that really allow it to compete against China and other trading blocs. The reality is that Mexico continues to be a threat to American interests, right? And so while Claudia Sheinbaum has sort of switched her security strategy and has played ball with the United States in most regards, the reality is that there are talks about a unilateral military strike in Mexico if the United States doesn't believe that Mexico is doing enough to fight and crack down on organized crime, to stop synthetic opioids from being trafficked to the United States, if it doesn't stop Chinese investment in Mexico and precursors that ultimately create fentanyl, they've caused a health crisis in the United States. They have these options on the table. And I think that many Mexicans are looking towards Venezuela and what's been happening with some of the actions from the Trump administration, and they're saying, and at least thinking, you know, we've got to make sure that we really tackle some of the main issues in Mexico, like corruption, like impunity, like organized crime, like the lack of rule of law, if it wants to maintain a good relationship with the United States. So there are just some issues that I thought I would draw upon. I am by no means an expert on Venezuela, especially with all of the amazing individuals that are on here talking about such an important issue in the hemisphere. But I do think that Mexico plays a fundamental role, not only for U.S. interests, but really for the rest of the region.
Thank you so much, Leila. Time flies when you're having fun. Unfortunately, we are almost out of time, and I really want to make sure that we have plenty of time to dialogue with our audience and have enough time for Q&A. So, Chad, I'm going to ask you to kind of wrap it up for us. In our, context of the broader whole of government approach that we've had recently towards defending the homeland, can you share a little bit about how the recent attacks that we're seeing on cartel-operated boats in the Caribbean and now in the Pacific as well, how does that illustrate the evolving threats that we're facing? And what message is that meant to send not only to Venezuela, but to other regimes like it?
Well, I think the message is pretty clear from the Trump team, which is, and I talked about this in some of my opening comments, that it's not going to be business as usual, that we're not going to sit back and watch thousands and thousands of Americans die every year from illicit narcotics. Now, some will say, well, you're always going to have an illegal drug trade. It's always going to be there. It's sort of like crime. You always have crime. But that doesn't stop you from trying to drive that down to the lowest amount possible. And I think the Trump administration is looking at this with sort of a clear-eyed and saying, okay, we're not going to sit back and continue to watch this. So we're going to go after, it's a multi-pronged strategy. I think it's really important to keep that in mind. Again, I talked about it a little bit. Everything that the Trump team has done over these last, I would say, 8 months, 9 months, have been leading up to this. But this is not the end of their effort. This is just another sort of stepping stone in their effort to target the cartels, to target the narco traffickers and others. So it's a longer strategy. As I like to say, we're 10 months into a Trump administration. It feels like 10 years in a good way. It's just there's so much activity and there's so much progress. And I think it's important to keep that in mind, that there's a longer term strategy here that the team has, President Trump and Secretary Rubio and others have here to go about this problem. So I'm looking forward to seeing where that goes, because I think the American people will say, look, we know that this is being done to protect us. Now, people can argue about legal authorities, and you can dance around the issue, but I think if you were to ask everyday Americans, are you safer today because of what President Trump is doing in the Caribbean and in the Western Pacific, they undoubtedly will say yes. And I think it's important to kind of keep that in mind. But it's not just a strategy for Venezuela. I think the Trump team is trying to send a message to all of the narco traffickers, right? It's not just the boats. I mean, obviously we see those tweeted out quite often, but there are actions and activities happening elsewhere in the hemisphere to deal with this issue outside of that. And again, it's part of a longer strategy at play here. So it's really important to keep that in mind, that it's not just, oh, we're going to send a bunch of gray holes down in the Caribbean to deal with this one issue. This is a larger strategy at play.
Chad, and thank you to all of you for being here and for your time and expertise. We will now start Q&A. There will be someone with a microphone, so if you have a question, please go ahead and raise your hands.
When we talk about democracy, I think, some of the recent developments in this country show just how imperfect it can be. What led to what happened in New York the other day. What I'm interested in on that topic, what you've really addressed well, is let's go back to the beginning. What caused the transition to begin with to communism? I know that Cuba, the insurgency of Cuba made a big impact, but why did that happen? It was a great economy. I think at the time, maybe a member of OPEC, maybe the fourth largest economy in the world at that time. So what went wrong internally to cause it in the first place? So what can we learn from that era as we go into the future?
Well, that's a very important question to what we're discussing here, because Cuba had a solid economy. Just a couple of historical points. As you know, the Cuba became independent from the Spanish after the Spanish-American War. The Cubans call it the Cuban War of Independence. We call it the Spanish-American War. The United States it ended in 1898. The United States occupied Cuba for 4 years, did a lot of good things, and left. The Cubans had a lot of, they had no experience with democracy. And yet, in the 50 years between 1902 and 1952, Cuba grew enormously, and in large part helped by U.S. investment and U.S. trade, et cetera. But there were dictators. In fact, what I say is, in spite of the dictators and in spite of the corruption, there's a lot of corruption, which, by the way, is present in every country in Latin America. I say this, and a lot of people protest, they say, well, how can you say that? I can say that because I've seen it. And I've seen the stuff in front on my desk when I was Assistant Secretary of State, or when I was ambassador, or when I had all the other jobs that I've had for the U.S. government, or in the private sector. Unfortunately, it's one of the illnesses of the Hispanic culture that the Spanish left behind. What happened in Cuba was that Batista, who had actually, ironically, been a very good president from 1940 to 44, and left Well, I mean, he lost. He couldn't run for re-election. His party won, and so he left for Daytona Beach, actually. He had a house in Daytona Beach. And so there were a couple of governments that were not very efficient and very corrupt. And so Batista decided to come back and establish order again. But that was unconstitutional. He had been in the military. He pulled the military together and he took over. Fidel Castro was a young lawyer, and he said, I'm going to bring democracy back to Cuba. And the entire time of the revolution, Fidel Castro spoke very eloquently about democracy. And he said many times, I am not a communist. Communism is a failure, on and on and on. 3 years after he took over, he said, I am and have always been a Marxist-Leninist. Now, which Fidel Castro was telling the truth? I think the last one. You know, he had been a communist, but he knew that the Cuban people would never support a revolution by a communist, not unlike what is happening in Colombia today. Gustavo Petro was a member of the M19 Marxist guerrilla movement, and they were very violent. And he left. They lost, and he left, and he came back to power. He says, all of that is in the past. I'm going to be very democratic. Well, now that he has tried to establish policies that are unpopular, he is trying to change the Constitution, just like Chavez did in Venezuela with a constitutional convention to change the rules of the game so they can stay in. Where did all that start? That started the Cubans, helped, by the way, by some professors from a Spanish university, left-wing professors, I mean Marxist professors, that said, you know, all we have to do is get our people in power, change the rules, and then we will have power forever. Well, it worked in Cuba, it worked in Venezuela, it has now worked in other countries and didn't work in Ecuador, for example. All the countries are different. We need to challenge all of that. There's a lot of, the answer, unfortunately, is very complicated. I know we don't have time for that, but what's happening, basically the bottom line is Fidel Castro, and I was there, and I believed him. I have to confess, you know, I'm a Catholic, so I can confess. I'll be forgiven for this. I believed him, and so did most of the Cuban people. I mean, he was so convincing, and he turned out to be not only a liar, but a murderer, a thief. Cuba has been destroyed. It's going to take an entire generation to rebuild that country.
Thank you, sir. We're ready for one more question.
Thank you. I'm Venezuelan born and raised in Venezuela for 21 years. And thank you for all of you for being here. Thank you for all the effort and everything you have been doing. You know, as a Venezuelan here, I always wonder what is next, right? And would be a two-part question. The first question would be, how do we tell the American people that yes, like the definite, to say, yes, we have to do this. Venezuela, the American people have gone through 2 different wars, Iraq, Afghanistan, so like, I don't want to have anything to do with this. And at the same time, on the other side, it's like how the Venezuelans, right, are like, you guys are here, what is the United States needs to do definitely to really help to make that transition? And I know there may not be a specific answer for that, but I think that's a question that many Venezuelans who are here and all over the world are asking themselves. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for coming. So on the first question, I know that they have some There are some people saying about comparing us with Somalia, Afghanistan, Iraq, or Libya. And there are, in my opinion, three very important differences. One, we have a legitimate leadership, not once, but twice, with María Corina Machado and President-Elect Edmundo González Urrutia. Those nations didn't have that legitimate leadership that unite a nation, because people are united under that leadership. Second, I think this is very, very important. We had a recent history of democracy. Even though we've been under a brutal dictatorship for 27 years, Venezuela, as my colleagues have said, was one of the most prosperous economies and a stable democracy during the second half of the 20th century. That's something that the other nations couldn't say. So democracy is in our DNA. And I come from a generation that grew up in a country that was already losing its democracy, but we're still fighting for it because it's in our DNA. And third, some of those nations that I mentioned had important clashes, like you can see in Iraq, on ethnics or religion. That's not the case of Venezuela. We're not cohesive on that. So I could provide more arguments, but I think those are main difference. And regarding your question, again, we are extremely grateful on the firm decision that the Trump administration has taken to tackle drug trafficking. Because as I said earlier, finally, someone is addressing the elephant in the room, at least coming from Venezuela. Because drug trafficking has been a key pillar to keep this regime that is not only affected the life of millions of Venezuelans, but affected the life of millions in this hemisphere, obviously including the US. So keep tackling the drug traffickers. It is very important, and any other illicit economic activity. Increasing diplomatic pressure coming not only from the US, but I think also it's a responsibility from our neighboring countries in Latin America. I see here Ambassador of Panama. Panama has been a very important ally on this, among other nations in Latin America. And this is a Venezuelan-led movement. We decided regime change. We're ready to rebuild our nation, but we believe we have to work for freedom, democracy, and a prosperous economy with our allies. They share our vision. And that includes the US and many other nations across the world.
I'll just comment really briefly on maybe the first part of that question, which is why should Americans care about this, right? We've talked about forever wars. We've talked about getting entangled. I would say this, and I agree with most of these comments. It's something that we talk a lot about here at AFPI, which is America first does not mean America alone. It does not mean we don't engage our international partners and our international friends and help them achieve this. But first and foremost, which President Trump and the team does, is what's best for Americans. And in this case, a democratic Venezuela that is not welcoming in Iran and China and Cuba that we've heard and others into the hemisphere is good for America. So there are legitimate American interest in making sure that you don't have a narco-terrorist, in charge of a country like Venezuela. So I agree with the democratic DNA that was talked about. Also culturally, religion-wise, very similar to the United States, which we don't see from others that want to come to the United States, right? We see just elsewhere in the world, it's very different. So I think there's a lot of reasons on why Americans should first care, but be a little, they're going to be hesitant, right? Because there's a lot of problems here in the US. Government's still shut down, by the way. So there's a lot of issues we've got to deal with here. And so I think a lot of everyday Americans do scratch their head from time to time and say, well, why are we investing in this? Why are we doing this when there are so many issues here? And that's, that's large part what AFPI does, and try to explain that, and others on this panel do in their own unique way. And of course, what Trump officials do as well.
We still have some time for questions.
Hello. My question is, do you predict that, is this working? Okay. Do you predict that the Trump administration will go further than the strikes that we've seen on the drug boats? Any strikes in Venezuela itself, or a takedown of the Maduro regime? And what do you hope to see from the administration going forward?
see a lot of people were jumping to answer that one. So here's what I would say. I don't speak for the Trump administration, and I would encourage others not to as well. But what I would say is, it goes back to my earlier comment, is I think this is part of a larger strategy. This is an issue, and if you listen to President Trump and others, they're talking about the narco-terrorist and making sure that they diminish or eliminate that capacity. And so whether you do that in international waters or on the sea, or you do that elsewhere, I think that's their focus. They're not talking about, oh, we got to get Maduro out and we need to do all this. It's, we're going to take down the narco-terrorists that are killing Americans. So I think they've been pretty clear about that's our mission, right? And it's not just Venezuela, as I mentioned, it's elsewhere in the region too. And so I think they have a broader strategy. I'm not going to predict what that strategy is, but I think it goes probably beyond what we're just seeing today.
So I'll just say real quickly, I don't think anybody on the panel wants to get out in front of the administration and start predicting that things will or won't happen. But if you look at the pieces of the puzzle or the deployments that are out there in the region right now, the deployment is really about optionality, right? The president truly has all options available to him at this moment in time. We said in the first Trump administration, all options are on the table to deal with Maduro and to deal with all the issues that are encompassed by Venezuela. All options are not just on the table in this second Trump administration, but they're literally on the Venezuelan coast, right? And so this deployment, in my opinion, is really about optionality. And I don't think anyone on the panel, again, wants to get out in front of the administration, but let's just say that there are a lot of different scenarios and options given the deployments.
We have time for one more question.
I guess I'm the special person. Yeah, I'm a representative from Oregon, and I wrote my question down just now. So as Oregon, as we all know, is a sanctuary state. And I'm increasingly concerned about the growing presence of transnational criminals, organizations, particularly transnational AGRA, outside cartels, linked groups, and foreign governments connected networks. Originating from China, I see them from Eastern Europe operating in my state, and especially seeing when one's arrested, the void is just filled automatically right away. And given that we're a sanctuary state, maybe what do you see in policies or things to help? Because obviously my state is not all Democratic. It is run by the Democrats, but obviously a lot of us want things fixed. Maybe you give us some insight or what things maybe you could give me, maybe would better that maybe?
Well, it's a very short question for a very long answer, which I'll try to shorten here a little bit. I mean, look, this is the Trump administration's strategy, which is it's a multi-pronged strategy. One is let's stop bad people and bad things from coming into this country. Venezuela is a part of that, right? Bad things coming into the country, but it's also about making sure we understand who's coming into the country and for what purpose and why, and vet them accordingly. Of course, we didn't see that during the Biden administration, so we've got to do that. But the question becomes, what do you do with people that are here? Or what do you do with people that continue to come here illegally? And that's where the removal, the deportation effort that is underway occurs, in trying to get people out of the country that are bad. And then to your point, and then you have some jurisdictions around the country that just say we're a sanctuary jurisdiction, and we're not going to support ICE. We're not going to help them remove bad, criminal, illegal aliens from our community. We're just going to release them back into the community. So I think the Trump team, and they've been sued, of course, federal funding to some of these facilities and trying to incentivize them to work with them. Because the reality is, whether it's Oregon or any other place, a place like Chicago or New York City, because of their sanctuary status, they're actually going to see more ICE officers there. They're going to see more law enforcement had they just cooperated with ICE to begin with. And so I think that's kind of a weird thing that they don't quite understand. They would just work with ICE to begin with. They would actually see fewer officers there because they can do it in a variety of ways. So it's tough. There's no silver bullet. Otherwise, it would have been used now to deal with sanctuary cities. But I think it's up to the residents and the people that live in those different communities to say, look, we're tired of having criminals released on our streets, and we're going to elect individuals that choose not to choose a different policy and go a different direction.
Sorry, we have no more time for questions, but next on the agenda, we're very excited that we're going to welcome María Corina Machado to join us on live video. I will be asking our very good friend of the America First Policy Institute and supporter, Astrid Hajar, to formally introduce her. But if I could first say a couple of very quick things. As many of you already know, María Corina recently received the Nobel Peace Prize. And I want to read what the prize said because I think it encompasses her work very well. She received the prize for her tireless work promoting democratic rights for the people of Venezuela and her struggle to achieve a just and peaceful transition from dictatorship to democracy. And for some of you who may not know this, she's joining on video today because she has been on the run and in hiding for a very long time inside Venezuela, and she has been working for a democratic transition. So a lot of us that work in think tanks, I think we tell people that we fight for freedom every day, but she takes that to a whole new level. So Astrid, please go ahead. And
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, AFPI, for this important and timely conversation. These are historic times, and I am glad that we're seated at this table. I am a proud American citizen, but also a proud Venezuelan immigrant. And it is an honor for me to be seated with all of you here today, and especially with my fellow Venezuelan friends who are true heroes. These are warriors, ladies and gentlemen. They've gone through so much. They've had relatives kidnapped, killed, torture. There's so much that these people go through. I cannot even tell you. Thank you for your humility, for your work, and for your strength and your courage. For years, many have looked at Venezuelan at a Venezuelan decline marked by cowardice, greed, and the hubris of a ruling socialism regime. And yes, a once prosperous nation was the victim of dictators like Hugo Chavez and Nicolás Maduro. But Venezuela's story is more than just the decline. Amidst oppression, there's also been marked bravery from its opposition movement and the rare selflessness it takes to stand up for the truth even under the threat of death. And now the world knows that story of bravery thanks to María Corina Machado. María Corina is not only the recipient of the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize, she's also a friend, a mother, a fierce leader and strategist for the renewal of her nation. She has put her life on the line to stand up for the Maduro regime alongside the legitimate president of Venezuela. Let me say that, the legitimate president of Venezuela, Edmundo González. With the help of President Trump, María Corina Machado is standing up for stability in this hemisphere. Success for María Corina Machado and the freedom-loving Venezuelans is a success for the United States of America as well. Under Maduro, Venezuela is a national security threat for the United States, as Maduro's narco cartel partners with adversaries like Cuba, Hezbollah, which is an Iran proxy, and China. Venezuelans are hostage to a transnational criminal organization. Venezuela's economy is also in shambles due to the folly of socialist policy. Its oil wealth and economy potential is being suppressed. But María Corina Machado stands for the truth that a free and democratic Venezuela would yield prosperity, not only for her country, but the entire hemisphere. María Corina will make Venezuela great again and do a great deal to stabilize South America and return it to the rule of law and increasing prosperity for all. I am profoundly honored to introduce Venezuela's top freedom fighter, who has been forced by the threats of the Maduro regime to join us from a clandestine location. María Corina Machado, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Astrid, and to all the team at the American First Policy Institute for this unique opportunity. Thank you, Greg Sindelar, Chad, Wolf, Josh, and Melissa, and all the members and representatives of the US government and different institutions present here today. I also want to acknowledge the presence of our very talented and experienced senior advisors to our government plan for sharing with you what we are going to put in place in Venezuela. Because after 26 years of profound devastation, We're finally at the threshold of freedom. Venezuela has come for a very long journey. It has been very painful. It has been very costly, but also it has been transformational. And perhaps for some abroad it's different. It's difficult to grasp what this is all about. But this is about a country that has come together, united as never before. Country that wants to live with human dignity, to reclaim our land, and to bring our children back home. So we have not only tear down the barriers that regime had built to divide us for racial reasons or for ideological reasons, but we have given purpose to this huge, profound citizen movement, because this is much more than a political struggle. This is an existential fight for life. This is an ethical struggle for the truth. And this is a spiritual struggle for the good. And that's why I want to tell you that we are here and we have achieved everything we have so far because of the people, because we have trusted our people. We have built trust among us. We have been told so many times it was impossible to do what we did. And we did it because of the people. And that's precisely the reason why I can tell you today that we will have an orderly and successful transition to democracy. Because today, and I dare to say that there is no other society in our region, perhaps in the world, that is as united and cohesive as Venezuelan society. As I say, we have no religious, no regional, no racial, even no social tensions among us. We all want to live in freedom, with justice, with prosperity, and with our children back home. As you have heard today, we have the plans, we have the teams ready to address a very complex situation. We know what we need to do in the first 100 hours to take control of the institutional sector and of our country, and we know what we need to do in the first 100 days in order to stabilize the process and put our country back to start growing. So I want you to know that we know what's needed to do to secure the institutional control and the territorial control of Venezuela, remembering always that our priority and the center is the people. We want the Venezuelan people to feel in their bodies, in their souls from day one, what it means, the arrival of liberty in Venezuela, but also that will come with a deep personal responsibility of every citizen in order to secure this process that have cost us so much, so long. We are absolutely aware of the challenges we're facing. On one hand, this is a multidimensional crisis. We have a crisis, a humanitarian crisis, economic crisis, financial crisis, security crisis, public services crisis. So we need to address all these issues because they're all priority. And at the same time, Venezuela has turned into a black box. Nobody knows how much is our reserves right now, how much is the budget right now, not even how many we are in our country as a population right now. So that's a huge challenge. And I want you to assure that we will bring order to this chaos, and we will secure transparency, which is the essence of trust. And also another challenge, and we realize there will be forces that will try to work against an orderly and irreversible transition. Sectors or agents that are accomplices to the regime, or others that fear that their corrupt dealings will be exposed. We know that, and some of them are those that precisely are actively lobbying in Washington, in other countries, against a transition in Venezuela and reproducing false narratives about a post-Maduro Venezuela. But I know that the truth is clear, the results are here, and that our main allies realize that Venezuela will be the next frontier for global innovation and growth. And I tell you, prepare to witness the most extraordinary resurgence of a nation from ruins to be a beacon of hope, of security, of freedom. And the fact that we will start from scratch because of so much destruction also is a huge opportunity because the frictional costs are going to be very low. So you will see Venezuela turn from the criminal hub of the Americas into the energy hub and the technological hub of the Americas, unleashing a business opportunity of more than $1.7 trillion, not only in oil and gas, but also in electricity, in critical minerals, in tourism, telecom, fintech, agriculture, and of course, AI, and so many other sectors in which Venezuela's unique, extraordinary national endowments will be open for private investment. And certainly in an environment of respect to the rule of law, of protection of international investments, and in a super competitive tax and regulatory framework. So this is going to be huge. Believe me, we will be part of the biggest economic turnaround in a century. And this will mean, and I know this is very important to all of you, that we will see millions of Venezuelans coming back home. The day Maduro goes, we will start seeing hundreds of thousands of our migrants packing and coming back home. So this is why I am absolutely convinced that we will face a successful transition. I'll mention very fast 5 reasons. First, because as I said, we have a united, cohesive society that has a democratic culture and that it is today organized as never before. Secondly, because we have a legitimated leadership, a president-elect that has immense popular support. Third, because all democratic parties, genuine democratic parties in the opposition, are together and working articulately. Fourth, because all stakeholders, investors, creditors, realize that this is a win-win situation in which we will all benefit from this orderly transition. And finally, because we have the true support of our international democratic allies that have understand that Maduro and his regime is a clear and growing threat to the security of the hemisphere and particularly to the national security of the United States. And I have to say that on behalf of the Venezuelan people, we're very grateful to President Trump for his decisive action and vision, to the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and all the members of his cabinet and friends in Congress that have been so supportive for Venezuelans' freedom and the truth to emerge. I just want to say at the end that what we're seeing is the triumph of courage. At the end, as we have said, peace requires freedom and freedom requires strength. And that's why we will win and Venezuela will be free. I'll be honored to host you all here in a land of grace. Thank you very much.
María Corina, thank you so much. I'm not sure if you can hear me, but I just want to say that we are so grateful that you made it on today. And I think I speak for almost everyone here when I say that it's impossible to know you and hear you and not admire you. So thank you so much for being here. Now, for the last part of our agenda, I want to invite Chad Wolf to wrap up the day with a few final closing words.
Well, what a treat. It's hard to top that. It's hard to go after that. But let me just close. I'll try to keep this pretty short. Let me thank everyone from all the panelists, everyone here on the roundtable, certainly our partners from Venezuela for making the trip and being here today. Thank you to Melissa and Josh Trevino, who many of you know. Josh wasn't able to be here today, but let's give them a round of applause for everything they've done. So everything that we discussed here today and probably more is not just about Venezuela. It's about the future of the Western Hemisphere, and it's about the need for strong American leadership in it. Too long, U.S. foreign policy has looked everywhere but our own backyard that we've talked about. I think that era is over. President Trump, Secretary of State, and other members of the cabinet, they have a vision, they have a strategy. And so Venezuela is a case study in what happens when America retreats. And when we do, foreign adversaries, as we've talked about, China, Russia, Iran, and others, fill that vacuum. Today's discussion, I think, made something pretty clear, that vacuum is now closing. The free world is re-engaging, and the United States is once again leading in our own hemisphere. Now, we don't necessarily seek to impose solutions by force, but a free, sovereign, and democratic Venezuela makes us all stronger. It weakens our adversaries, it stabilizes the region, and reaffirms a simple truth that freedom in the Americas is inseparable from America's own security. So here at AFPI, our Western Hemisphere initiative is rooted in that belief. Our goal today was not to command, but to convene, to bring together those who are doing the work every day and those who support that work. And at AFPI, we'll spread those America First policies and principles across the world that restore U.S. leadership, stand with those who choose liberty, and send a clear message that America will not back down from the tough fights ahead. To everyone who shared insights today, again, thank you. Know that the fight for freedom is heard. It is shared by millions who still believe in your country and the mutual values that we all have in common. The road ahead probably will not be easy, but today showed that there's resolve, there's clarity, and leadership ready to step up. Together, we'll ensure that the Western Hemisphere remains a hemisphere of freedom, sovereignty, and the rule of law, and not one of foreign influence. So thank you again for being here today. We enjoyed hosting you all. Thank you.